and welcome to the May 8th, 2024 William Hilton Parkway Gateway Corridor Independent Review Advisory Committee. We call it to order. Approval of minutes for the meeting of April 10th, 2024 and April 22nd, 2024. Do we have a motion?
I have a remark first.
Okay. Got a motion and a comment. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I can't get the seat to work. Here we go. There are two things in the minutes that we received a comment from Charlie as well as Ed, that on page 3, where we talk about discussion continued among the committee members and Mr. Noren concerning keeping a 4-lane bridge, and we don't remember having had that conversation here. So I think that needs to be struck from the minutes. That's one. Second one is that I do remember that we talked about getting in touch with Craig Wing at SODOT to understand where the $425 million comes from in the project size, and that there was a discussion between you and Sean on actually doing that. I am not aware of a discussion where the whole team, including the county and Passement, and tracked up to Colombia to discuss these alternatives. Now, so that, to me, that's...
You said, let's reach out to DOT and find out if these are feasible.
I said, let's call Craig Wynn and find out where the $425 million comes from.
Yeah. And the whole committee discussed it?
Okay, but that's far away from getting a whole group of people together to travel up to Colombia.
Well, we're talking about the minutes right now.
But I mean, this is part of the minutes, and I didn't agree with what's in these minutes. So I think that needs to be page 3 of the minutes. Yeah, these two things, and it's being very liberal with interpreting the conversation that we had in the meeting. So, and I find it frankly surprising that that happens without explanation to the committee. And furthermore, it also undermines if there's a whole discussion with SEDOT on the alternatives and where it goes and so on and so forth. Before we have even finished with Lochmoer as a consultant, I think that's very premature and not very ethical, frankly.
Well, I see that as you raising a question on your own push to have us do that, to reach out to DOT to find out where they stand with the alternatives that were being presented. So I want to go back to the first, the 4-lane bridge.
Do we have any clarification on that from the minutes? If it was John?
We can go back to the tape and listen. At the end of the presentation provided by Lochmueller at the meeting on the 22nd, they discussed the technical memorandum and the position about the 4-lane bridge not being feasible in their opinion. They've also got the technical memorandum that was part of this packet supporting that position from their professional perspective. So if there's an objection, then don't adopt the minutes and we'll go back and take a look. Mr. Walczak had raised that with our admin, and I provided him a response that said Lochmueller did discuss that. But if there's any objection from the committee, we won't adopt the minutes. I recommend not adopting it.
For clarification to the committee and the general public, can you tell us who actually went up to Colombia to discuss this? Who from the county and the town?
Well, first of all, let's get through the minutes, and then we can have that discussion.
Yeah? Okay.
But first of all, it's about getting the minutes approved.
Okay.
So are you okay with Sean's explanation about his response to Mr. Walczak?
Yeah, fine. I mean, I want to change the minutes, both these things. That's okay. Then I'm fine.
I'll just say this, I want more clarification.
Sure.
So If we can get that better clarification so that we are
Please.
voting on the right,
Yeah.
that would be better. And Mr. Warner, if you'll amend your motion.
I amend my motion to include, as the mayor said, that we get clarification. Upon clarification, that we can approve.
Okay. Do we have a second on that?
I'll second that.
Okay. All in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. So moved. Unfinished business, update on project process.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go through a brief review of our scope of work, progress made. I know Nate and his team are going to go through a more thorough, in-depth evaluation of project scope. But I'm going to provide you the high level, also along with some additional information, including the responses received from SCDOT at the committee's request to get feedback from SCDOT on the alternatives. Bridge rehab versus new bridge, and I've got some safety information to share. So again, I would start back. The authorizing resolution for this committee was to perform 4 key functions. We've completed 3 of those. The 4th one is to move through the scope of work to make sure that it's being executed in accordance with both the scope that the committee and town council had adopted, and that's in progress. The committee at the last meeting requested that there be an evaluation of alternatives that were developed independently by Lockmuller, as well as the I'll pull up a different way here. As well as the alternative that's proposed called the Express Bypass and labeled Bypass 3.1. So, in pursuit of the request from the committee, a trip was made to Columbia last Wednesday. The alternatives that were identified in the Lockmuller presentation, both on April 10th and April 22nd, were shared with SCDOT in advance of the trip. The alternatives included number 1, which was the current Beaufort County proposed alternative. Number 2, which included bow ties, the roundabouts at Squarpo, Chamberlain, and Spanish Wells, and Wild Horse Road. Number 3, which was the echelon or center turn elevated at one of 2 intersections in the Stony community. And alternative number 4, which was the elevated bypass through the entirety of the Stony community. The other alternative, not recommended by Lockmuller, but recommended for submission to SCDOT for response, was the Express Bypass, the 3.1 that has been discussed for some time. That bypass impacts property to the southern portion of the traditional cultural property in the Stony community and ties back into the Cross Island and business route near Honeyhorn, where Honeyhorn and Coastal Discovery Museum properties are. Those alternatives were submitted to SCDOT. They reviewed them in advance of the meeting and then provided feedback at the meeting on the alternatives. They also provided some information related to the bridge rehab versus a reconstruction or a new bridge, and I'll share that after we talk through this letter. But you can see those were provided. They did a thorough review of the alternatives to provide technical evaluation and any feedback related to feasibility or viability of the projects or the alternatives to advance in the project.
Sean, can I
Yes,
just
sir.
ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
I'm still puzzled why all these alternatives are being discussed with SCDOT when we are still reviewing these alternatives ourselves.
I will.
Maybe somebody can answer that question.
I was working at the unanimous direction of the committee to have these alternatives vetted and to provide feedback on the viability or feasibility of these advancing.
I don't think we ever.
Mr. Appiah, you brought it up, and then we discussed it as a committee.
What I brought up, Ellen, was the 425 million, which is the number used from the county by Lochmuller on this project, and they added portions to that number based on the various alternatives. And my question was to Sean, do we know what that number consists of? It's a basic number, and we use it in this grading. And we did not know. And so I said, well, why did you give him a call? That's the only thing I said. I have not asked for a full delegation to go to Colombia to discuss all the alternatives where we have not even finished. So I'm really puzzled. It hurts the credibility of this committee. It hurts my credibility.
Well,
everyone's credibility.
I would expand that to say that you're reaching out to Lochmuller and to DOT and to others also creates questionability. You have consistently reached out.
Sorry.
And that was advised not to happen.
I've once sent him an email. I've had no discussions outside of this meeting with Lochmuller, and they can attest to that.
Well,
And I'm free to talk to Jared Felix or to Craig Wynn or anybody else. Nothing anywhere says that I couldn't do that. But I mean, it's just basics.
Not when it involves the committee. Outside the committee meeting, you don't go and talk to other parties on your, because you're representing all of us, and I take issue that you're talking to whoever. I take issue if you talk to Charlie or whoever about it outside the meeting, because you are part of the committee representing me, and I may not agree with your questions. So,
I can talk as a citizen, as a resident, I can talk to anybody I like. I really can. And luckily,
not when it
proves,
applies to what the committee is doing.
I don't want to get into a contest with you. I find it very normal that if you
only
are,
have one set of views, it's yours, you don't want to listen.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could jump in.
Please continue.
Regardless, the direction supported by the committee was to have these alternatives vetted and ask for a response from SCDOT. There was no direction on the method to get that information. And so we went to Columbia and got feedback as requested. Again, the general feedback were technical in nature, related to project implications for cost, implication to the EA and timing, implications to funding, and then also feasibility to advance through federal highways through their program. They did have a representative from Federal Highways there that observed the meeting, but did not provide feedback at that time. You can see there was some concern about any alternative that expanded the study area, as it would expand the time frame up to 12 to 18 months to complete additional studies. There was sensitivity around the traditional cultural property. There is no distinction between town or publicly owned property and privately owned property as it relates to impact within that traditional cultural property designation and area. And they've been coordinating with the State Historical Preservation Office to understand the difference between those impacts within the TCP. As for specific feedback received on the alternatives, I'm going to go through, they had exceptions or concerns with alternatives 2, 3, 4, and then also the express bypass, and I'm just going to run through those. It's the feedback that came directly from them. So there was discussion on May 1st. This letter was drafted and submitted officially by their Deputy Secretary of Transportation and Chief Engineer. So alternative 2, which included the bow ties at Squire Pope and Spanish Wells roads, would require additional right-of-way, which Lockmuir provided in their presentation. Due to the increase in right-of-way within this traditional cultural property, this alternative would be eliminated, or the feasibility of advancement would be really low. They had concern with the potential issues around the roundabout volumes needed for dual lane. So it's maybe not just as easy as making a right to make a left, that the volumes experienced in those areas would require some additional capacity in the roundabouts. They thought the cost estimate and the construction duration were a little low to add those 4 roundabouts in, as it also increases the right-of-way phase of the project as well. They were concerned about potential increase in rear-end crashes at intersections for those that are not used to using this travel pattern to traverse through the area. So that was their feedback on alternative 2. Alternative 3, the echelons and the center turn overpass. There was some concern that with elevated structures and the substructure that's needed to support that would require additional right-of-way, that it would require, if you've got piers and columns, that it would require some additional right-of-way as those other travel lanes would be pushed further out to the side. And that would have impacted the Stony community. So they're concerned about the TCP and additional right-of-way needs. MSE walls, which are mechanically stabilized earth, I think walls, would also would have additional impacts for elevated structures and potentially increase the overall width within the Stony community. There was concern about the shoulder width, as you have the at-grade roadway and require shoulder width outside of those substructures to support the elevated area. That could have some additional impact. They also thought the cost estimate for this elevated area for the echelon or center turn at one of the two intersections that would cost more than what the estimate had shown from the Lockmuir evaluation. Additional right-of-way requirements would eliminate it, again, from the 4F review and the impact to the traditional cultural property. And they thought that this may trigger a full environmental impact.
John, there's somebody looking to join. Yeah.
Okay. And then the final one, yeah, they may trigger a full EIS due to increased impacts from this alternative. The elevated bypass, again, it would begin begin at the causeway to Hilton Island and run through the entirety of the Stony corridor, and then tie into Business Route and to the Cross Island Parkway. Again, they had some additional concerns here with an elevated roadway with a substructure and superstructure requiring support that would squeeze additional needs and right-of-way impacts to the outside of the existing roadway. And also to require work zone for contractors to be able to operate. Same thing with the mechanically stabilized earth walls to support the super elevation. Again, same thing with shoulder width. There was concern that these would require additional width within the corridor, which would require more right-of-way through Stony. Again, they thought the cost estimate and the construction duration here were too low. And if you recall, it was 425, 430 for alternative 1. It was 575,000. So even at a $150 million increased cost, they thought that was too low. And this adds a lot of complexity when you start getting superstructure and super elevation, an elevated roadway through that area. A lot of complexity to the construction period. and to the overall execution of the project. Also, you add in some additional seismic concerns once you have that component. And again, they thought that a full EIS would be maybe required if this alternative was considered. Again, alternatives 2, 3, and 4, very low on the feasibility or viability to be able to advance based upon the NEPA process, and to get it through federal highways with minimizing the impacts. Any questions on those? Those were the 3 Lockmuir alternatives that they provided feedback on before I go through the express bypass.
Correct, Sean, yes. Did you have a chance to get an explanation from SCDOT on that 425, how it was built up, whether it was based on 11-lane bridge, whether it was a 3-lane bridge or 4-lane bridge, what the contingencies are? I know the breakdown to some extent, divided by bridge work, road work, environmental, utilities and so on. But were you able to find out a bit more?
The cost estimate is based upon the configuration that's included in the EA. It's a 6-lane bridge. It includes 2 10-foot shoulders, one in each direction. On the outside, it includes 6-foot shoulders on the interior. The 10-foot shoulders have been reduced. It includes a 12-foot bike and ped pathway along the bridge. It's one bridge with 6 lanes. It flies over Pinckney Island. It does not land on Pinckney Island due to safety concerns and those expressed by Fish and Wildlife with that. It includes a 6-lane segment once you land on Jenkins Island. 6-lane segment complete all the way through the Squire Pope intersection. It includes intersection at Squire Pope with turn lanes, 2 turn lanes onto Squire Pope from Hilton Parkway and 2 right turn lanes off. It includes some minor intersection improvements at Spanish Wells and Wild Horse Road, but no significant widening through that segment other than a turn lane for Squire Pope as you go westbound. The current project on Jenkins Island does shift the westbound lane slightly north into the Jenkins Island track, closer to the power line easement. The project currently includes a multi-use pathway, primarily on the north side, that runs through Jenkins Island and moves back toward the power line easement. It also includes a single point on Jenkins Island at the intersection of Windmill Harbor. The Jenkins Island Road access is a right in, right out. It's no longer left in, left out. All travel movements internal to the Jenkins Island on the north side are now funneled through that signal at Windmill Harbor. Those are the elements that are included. There are some mitigation that's also included, not enough in my opinion, but it's the original mitigation that the SCDOT and the county had worked with community members in the past on a pavilion, some signage, a oral history, but that's what's included in that overall $425 million estimate.
Right, but so are they working, so let me understand, it's 3 lanes and a breakdown lane and a bike lane. So it's that 4 and 4 and 1.
It's 3 travel lanes in each direction. If we want to go on island,
6, yeah, and then
it's 3 travel lanes on. It does have a 10-foot shoulder. We call it a breakdown lane, but it's a 10-foot shoulder. On the interior, initially they were proposing a 10-foot shoulder.
on the bridge, I mean, I'm talking about the bridge.
That's been reduced to 6 feet in the current design. It's the same treatment as you go westbound. 3 travel lanes going off the island with a 10-foot shoulder to account for breakdown and a 6-foot interior shoulder.
So 9 lanes.
Well, it's 6 lanes in each direction. Most roadways have shoulders.
6 lanes on the, I'm talking about the bridge.
Yeah, it's 6. There are 6 travel lanes.
So 12 lanes,
3 each way.
There's 3 each way.
3 lanes, 1 breakdown lane on each side, and then a bike lane. That's what they're talking about? I'm just trying to understand what they're...
I'm trying to be as clear as I can. This idea of 11 travel lanes is a little hard to sort of promote here, it's 3 travel lanes in each direction. One big deficiency with the current bridge is there's no breakdown lanes. If there's an accident on the bridge, everyone that's coming or going to Hilton Head is in trouble. So there's a 10-foot outer lane. So the outside lane would be, the outside shoulder is 10 feet. Initially, they had an inside shoulder of 10 feet. That was reduced to 6 feet. That was after discussions that you don't need 2 breakdown lanes on the bridge. So that concession has been made, and the modified preferred that was presented in March of 2022 had that reduction. So it's a shoulder, a breakdown lane, 3 travel lanes, and a smaller interior shoulder. There is some barrier right between the left or eastbound and westbound traffic, and it's a very similar treatment on the westbound side. Okay?
I just like to understand what is, but did they talk about, way back they talked about a 40% 40 contingency on the overall project amount, which brought them to the 425. Did they explain how much the contingency, it's a big number, the contingency, how much that is, and whether that contingency differs on the various elements of the project? I mean, I would think that you have a contingency for the bridge, for the road work, for the utilities.
We did not ask for a detailed breakdown of every line item in the bridge, in the estimate for this project. We haven't settled on a alternative. So at this point, it's beneficial to look at the comparative assessment between alternatives to understand what the approximate cost of alternative 1 is versus alternative 5. I don't think there's much value in getting down into the breakdown of contingency versus the other components at this point. And at the beginning of this, as the environmental assessment went forward, cost was not a factor in the initial assessment that was done to vet alternatives. It was brought in as a secondary criteria along with a bunch of other items as you work through the NEPA process. I will say that there's still an element that needs to take place. It's required by the NEPA process, and that's a value engineering. Okay? So once an alternative is selected, there's an advancement through federal highways. There's a value engineering that has to be done to identify where there could be additional cost savings for the project.
Is a copy of that letter included in this package?
I have copies right here. It was not included in the packet because the packet went out before I had it, but I have copies right here that I'll distribute and make available.
Last but not least, who was on the bus? Who all went up there to Columbia?
From the town of Hilton Island, it was Mayor Perry, it was Town Manager Mark Orlando, Councilman Alex Brown, myself, and Thomas Boxley, who is the chairman of our Community Development Corporation.
And from the county?
From the county, we had Chairman Joe Passament, Interim Administrator John Robinson, and Jared Fralix.
Yeah. I just want to make for the record, Alan, that I think that, in my view, that trip was premature. You could have had a Zoom call and find out about these things. I would think that you need to do another trip once we are done with the complete evaluation, which would make it a level playing ground. Right now, you can push or step on the brakes on certain ideas, and I don't think that is the right thing to do. It's not fair for the residents of Hilton Head, and I think it's a fairer process to really wait until we've crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's.
Concerns are well noted.
Sorry?
I said your concerns are well noted.
For?
Your concerns are well noted.
Thank you.
Any other questions on alternative 2, 3, and 4 from Lockmuller?
I guess since Deidre was talking about this, Mr. Walczak had a couple of questions which Deidre addressed, one of them, but he does ask, now that we know the widths of the bridges from barrier to barrier is 36 feet, which can accommodate 3 12-foot lanes of traffic, why can't the bridges be restriped accordingly, perhaps paths with 3 11-foot lanes, one of a half foot clear with barriers on each side, with additional lanes added on each approach and beyond. I think that was answered at one point in time, that because it's a federal highway bridge, that it has to be a certain width.
I can give you what I've learned through the process, but they can
Yeah.
also.
One thing I was going to say was, based on our review of the information, was that was a topic that the town brought forth on their preferred modifications to seek a more reduced lane width, and they were accommodating to having 11-foot interior lanes, but then the outer lane, they suggested having 12, but I don't know if there's been further discussions with that.
Well, on the bridge proper, the response when we visited with the Secretary of Transportation, Christy Hall, and her team, this was a couple years ago, because we were recommending reducing the lanes on the bridges to 11 feet. The responses were the volume and speed associated with the bridge, along with SCDOT, they have an objective about freight as well. And so obviously any big truck that comes across here, contractors, garbage trucks, tractor trailers, they require 12 feet in those areas for lane widths. And also, you need again, one big deficiency is no breakdown lane. And so just restriping to accommodate 3 lanes on the existing bridges, you really run an issue with some safety concerns and any accidents. And I'm going to show you some safety information or some accident and collision information here in a minute. But that was the response that we received. They were amenable on, once you landed on Jenkins Island, to reduce the 2 interior lanes in each direction to 11 feet. They were supportive that the county, with town support, could submit a design exception, and it's something they thought they could support, but needed to maintain 12-foot lanes on the outer edge for that freight traffic that's integral to their program.
And I had one remark before we dive into Lochmuller's findings and presentation overall. I would like to make a motion that we seriously consider the horizontal bypass. And I'm saying that because we have looked into this extensively. We've learned a lot over the last few months, and we've come up with an alternative that I think Lochmuller needs to include in full detail in their work. So before we go further, I would like to have somebody second that motion, and then move to discussion on it.
Is there a second on that? Okay, so there's a first and second on the table. For discussion, if it means an increase in cost, then it has to go back to council for approval.
Well, we'll find out about that. I mean, but I think it's a...
I have a question. Who is this group? What qualifications? Who is the group that's put this together?
Yeah, I'll get to it in a
No,
minute.
I need that answer before that's part of my discussion.
I have
Would
made
it be
some
helpful
copies.
for me to give feedback that we received from SCDOT?
Well, we've
On that
got a
alternative?
motion and a second on the table.
Then I also have a proxy from Charlie Wolczek, who also would like to see this being taken at equal level as the other alternatives.
Mr. Walczak did not notify anybody of providing his proxy. I wish he could have done that.
Well, I have this proxy over here.
Okay.
Signed and sealed. I can give it to you later on.
Any other discussion on this? I mean, I'm not certain what it will mean, to adopt the horizontal. I mean, we haven't even gotten the full presentation yet.
No, but that's because we are going into it. I don't want to sort of backtrack again. I want you to make aware of this and have it be considered. And then as we go through the presentation, we can actually discuss it. And I've also brought along some copies for it.
Well, no, we have to vote on it now.
Let's vote on it now.
Prior to going through the full presentation. And that I don't see as beneficial because it is premature.
I
without going through the full
can tell you it's
presentation.
beneficial. It has,
Well, are you a traffic engineer?
No, I'm not.
You
Okay.
have construction experience. Have you built in wetlands? Have you built in marshlands?
Take it easy.
Those are simple questions.
Easy, yeah.
But my point being is that you're trying to vote on something and we have not gone through the presentation.
Shake your head all you want. Factual
I
questions.
can shake my head, yes, I can.
Hang
Shake
it.
the head, the body, and everything else.
We don't need to have interaction like
We have
that.
looked at it with engineers,
But,
we have looked at it from all the angles that we could.
and,
And for the, in the interest of our community and to really look at all the stuff all the possibilities that we have, it's a valid
in my
thing.
opinion, you're looking to throw out the response and the work that Lockmuller has done and, the response from DOT as to their findings and everything else by making this motion to push that through.
Well, we have the motion on the table, we can vote for it, vote on that.
Mr. Chairman, again, I'd be happy to provide just information, help inform
Yeah.
this decision by going through the DOT.
I want you to go ahead and provide that
I
information.
would also like for
Before we
Nate
vote.
and any member of his team to provide their opinion on this alternative from an engineering standpoint, and whether or not they believe it is a feasible alternative to
The
advance.
information needs to be provided so it's an educated
Yes.
vote.
So it needs to have the full consideration. That's what I'm asking. And after that has been given, then we can either say, well, this is a crazy idea, it doesn't work at all, or hey, there are actually some really valid points in here. And I think that's, having been on this committee for all these months, having worked on this for 4 years, we have become very granular on this idea, and it is it's worked out into a finer detail. And to push it aside is is a disadvantage to our whole community. So,
Yeah, I'm happy to provide the feedback that SCDOT provided.
no, it's not. I would like to vote on this now. So, who's in favor?
I'm sorry.
Yeah?
Sean, there's at least one error
Sorry.
right up there, glaring on the screen.
Sorry, you,
An error. DOT is just wrong on something.
so I will call the vote to, which was made by Mr. Avocat, second by Mr. Young, for full consideration of a horizontal bypass. Consideration. Those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand.
Sir, in favor?
Yes?
Yeah.
Those in favor, signify by raising your right hand.
And so is Charlie Wolfson.
Opposed? 3-2. Okay, continue, Sean.
All right, so we'll provide the information provided by SCDOT in response. Again,
If the audience could stay quiet while we have this discussion, that would be greatly appreciated.
the express bypass version 3.1 that's been most recently submitted was provided to SCDOT for to get their input and feedback, and assessment on viability for advancement. Due to the significant amount of impact to the Stony community, they thought that this would trigger a full environmental impact statement, and it would increase significantly the environmental impacts. As I mentioned before, the traditional cultural property, which has been now identified and included in the environmental assessment, any additional impact to the TCP, both from a public or private property standpoint, or other 4F resources, as was covered in the last meeting, would eliminate this alternative. The bypass does not account for impacts to residential relocations within the Stony community. As you go west of Squire Pope Road, or for the flyover bridge and acceleration deceleration lanes, as it ties back into the express bypass. At the last meeting, there was some discussion about this being an at-grade bypass, but as I mentioned, there are 5 to 9 residential properties that will be impacted with an at-grade bypass in this section. Residential relocations would be required in this area. The current alternative has two commercial property impacts and then two residential property impacts, no relocations of residential. There are two 4F resources, again, were covered in the last meeting, that will be impacted by the express bypass. Those are the town park, the old schoolhouse park, as well as the Coastal Discovery Museum and Honeyhorn property. The cost for construction for the express bypass would significantly be increased over the current project that's proposed. The flyover height, and this was, we talked about this last meeting, the flyover over the flyover to tie back into the business route would be approximately 20 to 24 feet in height to account for adequate clearance and depth of the bridge structure. As you can see, alternative 2, 3, and 4, very low feasibility to advance. There's statements from SCDOT that they'd be eliminated, as is the case with the express bypass that was presented. And what was submitted was exactly what was submitted to the town for consideration, and this is a response from SCDOT. They don't believe that the express bypass is a viable option on many accounts. Both property impact, environmental impact, cost, time frame, and would not advance this. Federal Highways would likely reject this option if submitted due to the additional TCP impact. The increase or the it would go against their objective of avoiding property impacts, minimizing property impacts, and mitigating in that order. So this would have additional property impacts, potential relocations of residential, as you can see there, and would not be an alternative that they would advance. Federal Highways would likely reject it if submitted because there are less impactful alternatives that have been developed. This is from SCDOT, and I've paraphrased a little bit from discussion related to that conversation with SCDOT. I'd ask Nate to share any of their professional engineering opinion on the feasibility of this alternative advancing.
That's part of the presentation that we'll be getting into later on. We went through, this was not included in the scope of services, but we had our fleet experts, Lauren and Chad, and also from the traffic perspective, we looked at it and we're going to be providing our input on it.
Just, I don't want to rain on your parade, Sean, but if we are talking about an independent consultant doing the work and we open up the door to have in-depth conversations with SCDOT and the consultant is privy to all this information, the views of SCDOT, now draw your conclusions.
Just so you know, Dietrich, the information that we're going to be showing you from our perspective was before we have not seen anything with that prior to, and Chad or Sean sent me an email with this document today, so we had not had any conversations at all. These would be our independent viewpoints on the bypass.
I do want to point out that I cannot modify the scope of work just at the direction of this committee. It was approved by town council. The committee's charge was for the work with a consultant to move forward materially consistent with the scope of work that they created. Before I would execute a contract amendment to evaluate this alternative, I would have to ask town council if they agreed. You made a recommendation on a scope of work to council, they approved it. You're changing the scope of work. I need to make sure that council agrees with that step. So I just want to make sure the committee is aware of that. So that's the letter and the response. I wanted to make sure I brought up the letter specifically on their letterhead because that's what's provided. I'm going to go through just very briefly a couple more things. All right. So in addition to the alternatives which the committee asked us to vet through SCDOT, There's been some questions related to a bridge rehab versus a new bridge. We did ask SCDOT what are the design costs and construction implications related from bridge rehabilitation versus a new bridge, and they shared some feedback with us. The existing deficient bridge, the eastbound Mackey Creek Bridge, is approaching 70 years in its life cycle. Bridge design and life cycle is about 70 to 75 years, right? So it's nearing the end, if it hasn't already. It's very close to the end of its life cycle. They said that bridge rehabilitation could be performed, but their preference is for a new bridge. And there's many reasons for that. As they looked at the substructure, the superstructure, and the bridge deck, there are significant concerns with all elements. The bridge cost, or the cost to rehabilitate the bridge, would likely approach the cost of a brand new bridge, okay? A new bridge could be built with minimal traffic impacts. It would be built offline and constructed, and then there would be a slight transition to move traffic onto the new bridge before the old bridge would be demolished. There's some significance in that because it provides minimal impact to traffic operations, during the construction period. They mentioned that a rehabilitation of the existing bridge could cause lane closures and delay to motorists during that construction period. And then finally, segmenting the bridges, segmenting the project into rehabilitation of 4 bridges would create additional time on overall construction, likely increase project cost, and result in differing life cycles of the bridges that are there. So their preference is from a cost standpoint, a constructability standpoint, impact to transportation, operations, and uniform life cycle. Their preference is to build a new bridge because they believe it would be more efficient and effective to do so. I did want to point out a couple of other things. This is a heat map that shows traffic incidents or collisions from 2016 to 2024. As you can see, there's a significant amount as you go through the bridge corridor section, and then also as you get into the Stony community. Specific statistics in this 4.1 mile section are that over 8 years, there's been 1,108 total collisions. It's about 140 a year. There's been 6 fatalities, 2 involving pedestrians, and there's been 81, so about 10 major injuries a year in this segment. And so when we think back of why we're trying to advance a project, without a project, we don't have a mechanism to help provide some improvements in this area, including trying to slow speeds, some traffic calming, and have a safer transportation system through this area. I do want to make sure that we understand, again, the council authorized scope of work was to make sure that we had a consultant review all the assumptions, the methodologies, and come up with what they believe were alternatives to advance for this project. They were encouraged to develop their own ideas and recommend their own alternatives. I think they've done that. And this was to be independent. The proposed plans have to pass NEPA. This was right from the ordinance adopting the scope of work. And that any additional impacts, including safety and other items that are considered by federal highways, would need to be considered. And so I think what Lockmuir has done is look at the alternatives and also the viability of the viability and ability for them to move through the process, the NEPA process, and be alternatives that would be supported by federal highways. And then the final thing is anticipation that this would not take longer than about 6 months to complete. And then there's all of the scope tasks that are below that. I'm just going to go through this at a high level. All items in task 1, other than the ongoing meetings and updates, have been completed. In task 2, the modeling data and recommended design concepts in task 2 have all been complete. In task 3, the model and operational analysis to lead to the recommended alternatives from Lockmuir have been complete. They have also expanded the study area beyond the Spanish Wells intersection to Gumtree in this modified project area, but also have added the other intersections downstream, both on the business route and on the Cross Island route to Sea Pine Circle. So it's been complete. We don't have all the results on that next segment, but they have expanded it. Task 3, with additional items here that have been considered adaptive traffic signals. They've looked at and provided you model outputs from the synchro that they've run. They've got data from the VISIM at the last meeting. They've looked at impacts to the TCP and have provided you 4 alternatives that they believe were viable to advance. They're now moving into task 4. The contract was segmented to try to get information from the Moss Creek through the Gumtree area, because that's the area that's slightly larger than what the was included in the NEPA process. And so I think they've provided that information consistent with the directive and the scope of work that was in the contract. They'll continue on task 4 to look at some additional elements and then the downstream impacts to those other intersections. And then task 5 would be delivery and presentation of their final report and findings. So I wanted to provide that information to make sure the committee knew where we're at, the community knew where we're at, that we're tracking, Nate and I are tracking the scope of work and progress kind of in lockstep, me from what council and the committee approved, and then Nate and I from the contract that we've executed for them to do the work. Any questions on what I've presented? I didn't mean to go so long, but I think that's all important information to have on the table.
Any questions?
Okay,
Great.
thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll go ahead and get started with our portion of the presentation. Just so everybody's aware of members of our team that are joining us. There we go. A lot of familiar faces, Kate, Michelle, Chad, and Lauren, you all know very well, but we're also introducing a couple new team members with you. Jason Hickel is one of our structural department managers. He helped us perform the analysis of the existing bridge data that we'll be speaking about here in a moment. And then Sean Dykes is our in-house transit expert, and he provided input on the memorandum we put together regarding the feasibility of trying to maintain 4 lanes west of Squire Pope. At the end of the day, we'll go over the project progress. Sean spoke to most of those items. We're in concert with that. We're also going to give you summary findings related to the seismic review we performed, the memo I mentioned before, our cursory observations related to the southern bypass alternative, and then finalize the presentation with reminding everyone once again where the final scoring matrix landed with the alternatives that we are moving forward with in our study. This slide just shows the items that we've been working on since we last met on April 22nd. Essentially the items we'll be speaking about today, as well as the items that we had submitted to Sean as deliverables on Friday, which would include this presentation, the technical memorandum for task 1.3.3, the draft summary of findings memo for alternative 4. That is the ultimate deliverable for task 3. We won't be speaking to that directly as a part of this presentation, as that is just essentially everything that we've completed to date and we've been talking about at multiple meetings, so we did not want to be redundant with the information provided today. And then we've also, as Sean mentioned, we've began modeling the intersections downstream of the Cross Island Parkway moving forward.
Nate, can I ask a question? I've always been very interested in the modeling, VISIM or Synchro, I don't know which one's better, but it would be very good if we could actually see that. I mean, we saw at one point in time you had sort of you did show us the sort of the overview in the presentation, but really to have a top-down view of the area, Hilton implementation to Moss Creek, and to see what it does to the traffic volume, which they do in live modeling kind of thing. Can you do that? Could that be done in the next meeting?
Correct. As a part of task 4, we'll be including VISIM modeling, and that will include the entire project study area. Wanted to give you all an update on where we stand with the project overall. I would say that we're right about 60% complete of the overall project. We are currently wrapping up task 3. That's the midway point of the project. And since we have began efforts in task 4, 60% is an accurate estimate. For task 1, as Sean mentioned, we are essentially complete now that we've provided you with the deliverables associated with task 1, with just a couple more meetings that we have outlined in our scope to yet provide. Task 2 was the existing conditions in the travel demand model, and we have completed that. Task 3 was the intersections within the modified project study area, west of the Cross Island Parkway and Gumtree Road. The deliverable for task 3 was the draft summary of findings memo that was submitted to you on Friday. Again, we won't be speaking to that directly. However, when we get into question and answers, if during your review you do have questions, we'd be happy to address those. And then moving forward, after we receive any feedback from that summary findings memo, we will incorporate those and then be presenting our findings to members of council either in late May or early June tentatively, but that date has yet to be set. As for intersections downstream of the Cross Island Parkway, we have began those based on direction received from town staff on May 1st. With alternative 1 for the reasons that Sean had outlined in his portion of the discussions today. With the following modifications being that in lieu of dual auxiliary turn lanes at Squire Pope Road for the eastbound and left turn and southbound right turn movements, we will be seeking to evaluate the impacts of those are single turn lanes, as well as modifying the location of the meeting access into Crazy Crab. The purpose of those are to minimize impacts along the north side of William Hilton Parkway, west of Squire Pope Road. The task 5 is just a summation of everything, preparing a formal traffic safety and operations report that would be submitted for review to council and then ultimately presentation. So that concludes the project progress update. Does anyone have any questions on where things stand?
Any questions?
Okay. I'll go ahead and move forward into the task point 1.8 in our scope addendum that has been approved by the committee and town council was asking us to provide a very high-level cursory overview of the feasibility if seismic retrofitting or structurally rehabilitating the existing structures was feasible in our opinion as compared to constructing new bridges. And again, just stressing that this is just a review of information, not for us to do any redesign, not to critique anyone's calculations or get into fine details. Just really focus on, truthfully, the life cycle cost analysis in the US 278 bridge seismic study that was completed by the DOT and their design team, which was done by KCI, and I think there was another sub-consultant that assisted them. That was dated April of 2020, so it's about 4 years old to date. We received a copy of that a few weeks ago on April the 15th. It was a very lengthy document, approximately 1,800 pages in total. The narrative and summaries were approximately 100 pages, with the remaining being data outputs, very detailed calculations. But again, as I mentioned, based on our scope, we focused really on the life cycle cost analyses and providing our input. The study focused on 3 different options. Either rehabilitation and seismic retrofits, or option 3, which was the new lane, so a new 6-lane structure similar to what the DOT's preferred alternative was. Options 1 and 2 are the rehabilitative options. They're very similar in that they both consider a new eastbound structure that would provide, in a temporary condition, 4 lanes of traffic, 2 lanes in each direction, while rehabilitative efforts are being done on the existing bridges. The difference between the two is that in option 1, both westbound structures for Mackey Creek and Skull Creek would be rehabilitated, whereas in option 2, the westbound structure over Mackey would be replaced, but the westbound structures over Skull Creek would be modified in a manner similar to what we'll go over here in option 1. Within the study, they really refer that eastbound structure that I talk about as a lifeline, so that traffic to and from the island can be maintained during rehabilitation. The sequence that they assumed was that the eastbound structure, as I mentioned before, would be constructed first, while the existing lanes on the 278 bridges remained in place. Once the new eastbound structure, that would allow 2 lanes of travel in each direction. The traffic would be moved over to that to allow, again, equivalent 4 lanes to and from the island. And then rehabilitation efforts can begin on the existing structures. Once the rehabilitation efforts are completed, then the eastbound new structure would be reconfigured to allow for 3 lanes of travel with shoulders on either side, a breakdown lane and an interior shoulder. And then the rehabilitated structures would provide the 3 lanes in each direction as well as shoulders. And option 3 is a new 6-lane structure, similar to what the DOT's alternative is. The next few slides just provide cross-sectional views of what was shown in the study. We did not create these, but I thought that they would be beneficial just for everyone to get a feel for what they were from a cross-sectional view. Options 1 and 2, as I said, were very similar in that they both assumed this lifeline structure. So at the top, you can see in a temporary condition, that new eastbound structure would be built wide enough to accommodate 2 lanes in each direction while the rehabilitation efforts are taking place. And then once those are completed, then you can see at the bottom, they would allow 3 lanes of travel with shoulder widths. Option 1 over Mackey. If you recall, I said that option 1 assumed that the westbound structure over Mackey would be rehabilitated. And so here you can see that the existing condition of 2-lane structure, as we move down, it kind of gives you an idea as to what would be done. So bring it down, you can see that it would be widened on the north side of the road to provide a multi-use path, and then widened to the south to allow the next lanes as well as the shoulders. So just to remind the group that this study was completed in April of 2020, and the current DOT's alternative recommends that multi-use path runs along the south side of the bridge for the entirety of this length. So again, that's just due to the fact that this was created in April 2020 and modifications have been done. Over the Skull Creek bridges, again, in options 1 and 2, the improvements to Skull Creeks would be the same, so they join these 2 together. The illustration here shows what's proposed for the first 6 spans of the structure. So that'll be starting from the west end of the Skull Creek bridges moving east, the first 6 structures. That the eastbound lanes would remain in place, where the existing westbound structures would be removed. And then you can kind of see, if you bring line straight down, you can see where the widening takes place to ultimately allow the 3 lanes westbound, shoulders, and a multi-use path. For spans 7 through 26, you can see in the existing condition they're very close together. It would be joined by new concrete deck joining them, and then allowing the 3 lanes of travel in westbound and then the multi-use path. Option 3 was the new 6-lane bridge. So you can see the break line here if you just imagine this coming up to here. So as Sean was describing, from right to left, which would be south to north, you have the multi-use path, you have a shoulder, 3 lanes of travel, interior shoulders, 3 lanes of travel, and a shoulder on the other side. Before I move further, I just want to pause. Does everybody understand what the study assumed for each option? Okay. Let's move forward then. So some of the key findings that we noted, these are not our opinions, these are just things we pulled out of the study as we wanted to bring to everyone's attention. The existing bridges were designed and constructed prior to current seismic requirements from SCDOT's perspective. So therefore, all existing bridges are considered inadequate from a seismic perspective. The grading from the seismic perspective are 2 different criteria. One would be the functional evaluation earthquake, or the FEE, that's a lower magnitude earthquake event that has a higher chance of occurring. And the most conservative design threshold would be the safety evaluation earthquake. That's a higher magnitude earthquake that has a lower chance of occurring. New bridges can be constructed to meet SEE requirements. And the ability for existing structures is based upon some information on the slide I'll show in the next couple of slides. But I did want to note there at the bottom that given the critical nature of the TIF-70 bridges, they are considered an OC1, and that's just a rating that says that any rehabilitative efforts must meet the minimum FEE design thresholds. The do nothing cannot, is not an option. They also looked at the soils conditions underneath the existing bridges, and what they found was that they exhibit a potential for liquefaction to occur, and that's essentially allowing for roadways to settle, slide, or collapse if a seismic event that was at or above an FEE level took place. And in order to mitigate that, what would be needed is essentially bringing it up to SEE levels, and that would require additional foundations, deep soil mixings, or others. And the design team noted that the cost that would be required to bring that up to an SEE level, not only from a cost perspective, but also greatly increases the environmental disturbance. With the DOT's concurrence, the design team moved forward in their study to only see FEE level seismic. So therefore, anything that we talk about with retrofits does not meet SEE requirements with the modifications. Again, as I said, new bridges can meet that SEE requirements, but in this case, the 278 bridges will not be able to meet that FEE at best. And I think maybe if you recall a couple of meetings ago, the county had shared a statement that the existing bridges wouldn't be able to meet seismic standards, and we wanted to get the confirmation as to what that meant. I think that's what they were referring to, was that it would vary from a cost perspective and impacts that it would just would not be possible. So the key findings in the study was, what we really focused on was a life cycle cost analysis they put together. Of course, this was completed in 2020, so they're using 2020 dollars. They use an annual inflation rate of 2%, which, as we know, that's pretty low considering what we went through the last 4 years. When they're making their inputs for their model to life cycle cost analysis, they did coordinate with local contractors who have experience with heavy construction over waterways, and the feedback that they received from these local contractors is that it's approximately 1.5 to 2 times more expensive to rehabilitate existing structures as compared to building new when you're over water. And let me see here. So at the bottom, you can see what the results were for the 3 options. We have initial construction cost that is, I might notes written down here, so that would be the cost of any new portions of bridges, widening the existing bridges that remain, demolition cost, and rehabilitation of the bridges that were retained. The future construction cost, that accounts for the replacing of the rehabilitated structures once they've reached the end of their useful lives. So in option 1, for example, as I said, had assumed the rehabilitation of the west end structures, so it's 85 million. It's saying that, okay, maybe 130 million roughly at the beginning, but when they reach the end of their useful life, then you're going to have to pay 85 million with these estimates to replace them. User cost, that was an assumed rate that they inserted into their model. This would include time lost due to traffic backups, reduced lanes, and additional time spent for traveling and detours. And then the maintenance cost would be estimated maintenance for existing bridges or new bridges over the length of their study period. Here's a very key finding that we noted, was that the costs shown only reflect rehabilitation. It does not reflect costs for any seismic improvements. And as I mentioned before, they have to be modified for seismic improvements. It cannot be left alone. Within the study, they noted that the design team was directed by the DOT not to put together seismic costs, what it costs to do that. In our opinion, I don't think that was for nefarious reasons. I think rather it's just they probably ran through the life cycle cost at the beginning, and you can see the delta already, just based on structural rehabilitation efforts, and then knowing that your millions, tens of millions potentially, what it would be to improve things to just get to the FEE level, they just decided to not use the resources to get those defined costs. So as we move forward through this portion, just remember that these costs do not include millions more that would be to bring it up to the seismic standards which are going to be required. So again, you can see from left to right that option 1 has a lower front-end cost, but because you're retaining existing structures and rehabilitate them over the life cycle, it's going to be more expensive. Option 2, you're replacing more at the front end, so that's why this is more expensive, and then the future construction cost is less. Same order of magnitude on time frame. Option 3 would be a new bridge right out of the gate. Initial construction cost is higher, which makes sense, but then you don't have as much, there's no future cost, there's no user cost with that, and then the maintenance cost is is much reduced. And I think my interpretation of this was that you may wonder what the difference is in maintenance. The study assumed that the existing bridges have a lot more steel components, and those require more maintenance over time, versus this would be more of a fully concrete structure. The design team also went through benefits and risk matrix on a variety of different topics for each of the options. For option 1, 2, and 3, we reviewed those from a cursory perspective and agreed with the findings. So these are our kind of observations as we conclude. So again, we did not get in and do any type of redesign. We didn't do any calculations. We just focused on the life cycle cost and looked at their methodologies. And in summary, we agree that the findings are valid and they appear to follow standard engineering practices. As I mentioned before, one of the key things is that when we look at these costs, these are not true costs because these do not include what would be required to implement the seismic improvements. Options 1 and 2, of course, right out, it's obvious that they take longer to do because they both require a new eastbound structure to allow. So this would be a 6-lane structure. Even in option 1 and 2, you need to construct a new lifespan bridge that would be approximately the same time period. Then once you move traffic over, then it takes, they estimated approximately 2 years to complete all the rehabilitation efforts. And what I noted here was that we look at this 60 months. That's just implement option 1, but does not include the time that would be spent whenever you have to go back up and replace the bridge that you rehabilitated.
Just curious, just to ask the question, but on option 1 and 2, that 60 months, does that include the seismic work as well? It doesn't include the cost.
It does not include the costs. And Jason, that's something we could get back to you. I don't recall offhand. Jason, are you on the line?
I am, yes.
Do you recall if that time frame for options 1 and 2, if that included, because in their model, they did include the base improvements, they just not provide a cost. So do you know if that included the schedule?
I can't say for sure off the top of my head.
Okay, we can follow up with that, Mayor, if need be.
And there's a cost that you can't include, and that's a cost to economy. And every place that they've rehabbed the bridge, they've found that they had to restrict traffic. So instead of 2 lanes, we might be down to 1 lane, and instead of an hour, it might be 3 hours to get across the bridge. And I look at Interstate 91 over the Deerfield River in Massachusetts. It was down, and there was no tractor trailers going across that bridge on the interstate because they had to restrict because of the vibration of 2 lanes. So you have to add into that, which is unknown, what it's going to do to our economy.
Couple more slides related to this, and Sean spoke about this. When we read through it, it was, they're reaching 50 years of age. So best case, approximately another 25 to 35 years rehabilitated structures, whereas compared to new, with new design practices and proper maintenance, a new bridge could last 75 to 100 years. Apologize, let me move this down a little bit so I can see. So I know that there was a question about, again, this whole discussion was to see if it was feasible, if it's just simply from a temporary condition. And, in our opinion, even if you looked at option 1 that had the most or had the least cost from a front end standpoint, again, that cost does not include what the seismic requirement improvements would be. And so that delta that you see between the 130 approximately and the 170, that would decrease substantially from the front end. And then you get into still having to replace that at some point. Options 1 and 2, Sean mentioned this as well, you put this on different maintenance schedules. And then whenever you have to go back and replace it, then you're causing disruptions to the public again whenever you have to replace it at whatever time is deemed feasible to replace it. And then in summation 2, options 1 and 2 would never be able to meet SEE design requirements, which is the current best design practices, whereas a new structure would be able to do that. With a lower overall total life cycle cost as well as on a shorter time frame. So for all these reasons, we do not recommend the pursuit of rehabilitation efforts or retrofits as compared to building new. Does anybody have any questions with that? Okay. The next topic we'd like to get into is the task deliverable 1.3.3, which was asking us to provide our professional opinion if there was an opportunity to maintain 4-lane section of Hilton Parkway west of Squire Pope Road. And I'm going to allow Michelle Romine of our team to go into more detail on that.
Good afternoon. As Nada mentioned, as part of our scope, we are tasked to provide a high-level review of whether a 4-lane section could be maintained between Moss Creek and Squire Pope if one or more of some select strategies were implemented. These strategies include a second bridge, modifications to the existing mass transit system, implementation of a new ferry system, and/or the implementation of a facility usage fee, which is commonly known as congestion pricing. As a basis for this high-level review, we revisited the existing and future travel times along this corridor. We used Vism, which is a microsimulation tool, in order to calculate the travel times. As shown, it currently takes about 19 minutes to travel eastbound along US 278 between Moss Creek Drive and Indigo Run during the AM peak hour, and then about 21 minutes to travel in the westbound direction along US 278 between Indigo Run and Moss Creek during the PM peak hour. The section of road is about 8.2 miles long. So using those calculated travel times, the speed along this corridor is about 26 miles an hour during the AM peak hour and 23 miles an hour during the PM peak hour, both of which are well below the posted speed limits of 45 miles per hour and 55. We've presented this table in previous meetings, and as shown, the 2045 travel times are expected to increase by approximately 36% in the eastbound direction in the morning and approximately 23% in the westbound direction during the PM peak hour. So in summary, we found that there's already significant congestion in this area. This is experienced by you today as part of your daily lives, and it's expected to be even worse in 2045 with our forecasted growth. We looked at the traffic models and found that the 2023 existing volumes would need to be reduced by about 30% in order for the current 4-lane configuration to operate acceptably. And then the 2045 traffic volumes would need to be reduced by about 40% in order for the current 4-lane configuration to operate acceptably.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
To me, there's a difference between traffic flows on the bridges and traffic flows on the island. As I understand it, the bridges are not the problem; it's the lights on the island and Windmill Harbour. And have you run the models, assuming that 1 lane is good for 1,500 cars per hour? So 3 lanes on the bridge would be good for 4,500 cars per hour during the peak hours. Have you run that scenario at all? And then so separating out the bridges from the flow of traffic on the islands, coming onto the islands, or off the islands.
We ran the models based on the existing lane configurations and the volumes that we have. And then from there, and we included all of the traffic signals because all of those play a role in how the traffic operates. As you mentioned, the signals can stop people, so we included the entire area. And from there, we determined and backtracked the traffic volumes to see at what point do all of the intersections and everything start operating acceptably. And that's how we determined this 30 to 40% range in reduction.
Thank you.
So we've spoken about a second bridge in the past. The second bridge has been discussed locally for quite some time now. And as we've discussed, a second bridge could take up to 20 years to construct once all of the studies and planning and design are complete. This second bridge has not been fully vetted or really even started yet, so it would take quite some time to move this forward. And as we've shown in the past, the operating conditions are already congested today, and in 2045, they're only going to be worse. So our focus and our scope was to mitigate the existing and forecasted conditions. And as again, we've shown, there's going to be a lot of congestions. So it is our opinion that a 6-lane section is needed independently of a second bridge. We also looked into whether any modifications to the existing transit system could be implemented in order to maintain a 4-lane section along US 278 between Moss Creek and Squire Pope. There are several transit systems currently provided, including the Palmetto Breeze Trolley, which is a seasonal service, an on-demand van service, and a shuttle for beach parking. Based on the data that we have, we found that transit accounts for a small portion of the total regional trips. And in order for the transit system to be more effective, it would need to be much more robust. This includes increasing the number of days per year that the service runs, as well as the number of times per day that each service runs. We also found that as of 2021, transit only accounted for 1% of the regional mode share. Mode share includes trips made by passenger vehicles, pedestrians, transit, and more. So it's clear that if transit only accounts for 1% in this area, that it is not highly utilized, and it would need to grow exponentially in order to reach that 30 to 40% reduction in traffic needed to maintain a 4-lane section. We looked into a ferry system, as well as the facility usage fee. Similar to the second bridge, to our knowledge, there's been no formal studies of a high-speed ferry system that have been initiated. Therefore, it's our opinion that it could take between 10 to 15 years for a high-speed ferry system to be fully operational. And then even still, if and when a ferry system could be implemented, it's highly unlikely that the resulting reduction in traffic would allow for a 4-lane section. And again, we're looking for between a 30 to 40% reduction in traffic. Now for the facility usage fee, South Carolina state law currently prohibits tolls or fees from being implemented on any existing roads. Only new roads can instate fees and tolls. That being said, if a facility usage fee could be implemented, the fee would largely impact commuters, not necessarily tourists. Commuters largely enter the traffic for work and account for the majority of traffic during our AM and PM peak hours, where we see most of the congestion. But again, even still, if a facility usage fee or congestion pricing could be implemented, it is still highly unlikely that the resulting reduction in traffic would allow for a 4-lane section to be maintained. So overall, to kind of recap everything that we looked at in the 4-lane viability memo, we found that in order for a 4-lane section to operate acceptably, the total reduction in vehicles within this area would need to be between 30 to 40%. While implementing all of the different types of strategies would certainly help slow future traffic growth and should still be considered, it is our opinion that even if all of these strategies are implemented, the reduction in vehicles would not reach 30%. And then speaking to what Nate has spoken about beforehand, these strategies would still not address the structural issues associated with the existing bridges. Therefore, it's our opinion that all of these strategies should be considered as viable alternatives, but they would not be able to solely address traffic congestion or mobility-related concerns along this corridor in order to allow for a 4-lane section to be maintained. So before we get into the next section, are there any questions?
Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay. So as Nate mentioned earlier, it's not part of our scope, but we looked into the southern bypass as a cursory overview. And from a traffic perspective, it was discussed in the December 12th committee meeting that one of the biggest priorities was to limit right-of-way, whether it's public or private. And that was the guidance that was given to us when we are selecting our potential alternatives that we've already presented to you. This topic was again re-emphasized at the March 27th committee meeting. So looking at this very high level from a traffic perspective, the southern bypass is not anticipated to improve the operating conditions at Gumtree Road. That's because there's no effective way to bypass Gumtree. Our fourth alternative, which is the elevated bypass, does bypass Gumtree. So that's a key difference between our alternative 4 and this southern bypass. We also found that while the bypass has the opportunity to remove most of the through traffic from US 278, if the bypass remains at grade, then it will still need to cross several streets as shown below, which reduces the effectiveness of the bypass. So we've circled a few areas here in this image, which calls out the different locations of the local roads that the bypass will still need to pass if it's at grade. And that means the intersections would likely be stop controlled. So similar to the failing conditions we have at Spanish Wells and Squire Pope, those will likely not go away because the traffic will still be at grade and will still need to pass. You could potentially elevate it, but then that brings us to our alternative 4, which we have already proposed. One remaining item here is the connection to the Cross Island Parkway. As shown over here, the connection would actually need to locate further east, and it would likely require grade separation even still.
Can
I believe we have.
add something to this? Thank you for really looking at that on-grade bypass. So we've worked on a, what do we call it, new and improved version.
Dimitri, just so you know too, we do have Chad and Lauren. They're going to weigh in from the environmental and roadway perspective. Would you like to wait till after they weigh in with their input?
I can hardly hear you.
Sorry, Chad, our environmental lead, and then Lauren, they're going to follow this traffic perspective, and they're going to provide their environmental and roadway thoughts. Would you like to
I'll wait for that and then.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Lauren, would you like to go ahead and
Yes. As Michelle mentioned, we've looked at this at a high level, and as you can see there, we identified the existing parcels, both publicly owned and privately owned, and where we felt there would be full takes, access concerns of that nature, as well as at the Jarvis Creek area there. Obviously, you can't go at grade through Jarvis Creek, so there would need to be a bridge there, and to tie directly to the Cross Island, you would have to have that bridge extend over the existing William Hilton Parkway to tie directly into the Cross Island, as the concept is designed to do. So from that point of view, Nate, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. We've done a cursory evaluation here. From a feasibility perspective, it can be constructed. There's just some concerns that would need to be addressed as far as actual horizontal alignment, making sure you're meeting design speeds with proper curve radii, and more particularly the tie-ins at each end. At the west end, if you're at grade there, then you kind of have the same situation you have now on the Parkway. So it really, to make it function well as a bypass, you'd have to elevate and have a flyover to be able to tie back in. And then, as I mentioned, at the east end, you really need to be elevated to tie directly into the Cross Island, as well as going over the creek area and Spanish Wells. And then you do have the issue of the local access through that area. There are several private properties that would be cut off if this was a true bypass with no local access. So you'd either have to bridge over those access points, or you'd have to have at-grade access through there. Looking at right-of-way, just a rough estimate would be 6 acres of additional right-of-way for this. And then by doing this bypass, you would be able to potentially reduce the right-of-way takings along this section of the existing parkway that is in the state option, but that is only 1.2 acres. We went through their drawing and added all the takings up through this section. So it would be a net increase in right-of-way through the Stony community, as well as the additional parcels that would be impacted. And then the third point there, as far as the relocations, and Chad will get into a little bit more of that on when he reviews the environmental. Move on to Chad then to kind of give the overview of the environmental.
Thanks, Lauren. Nate, you can go ahead and go past this slide. I just wanted it here in case we need a quick reference. So from an environmental perspective, a couple qualifiers we need to keep in mind here before we get through this table. First, when looking at potential impacts from a high level like we are right now, and the risks associated with incorporation into SCDOT's project, it's important to recognize that the conceptual impacts are what we're looking at here, plus SCDOT's recommended preferred alternative. So that's why it's important to give acknowledgement to SCDOT's previous findings and considerations, and why that is the first column here in this table. It's also important to recognize that NEPA and SCDOT did acknowledge this in their letter, and like Nate said at the beginning of his presentation, we did not receive a copy of that letter before this presentation and this evaluation was pulled together. So, but the important thing to remember is that NEPA, including Section 106 and Section 4F, does not consider public and privately owned properties differently. It's only concerned about how a project affects a specific resource. And you can tell, and I gathered it just in my quick look at SCDOT's letter at the same time as you guys saw it. They did really focus in on the Section 4F aspects of each alternative. And, you know, that's why Section 4F and Section 106 are at the top of my my table here. Section 106 feeds into Section 4F. Section 106, again, is referring to cultural resource impacts. Those are properties that are listed or eligible for the National Register, both above ground structures, bridges, and archaeological resources. So SCDOT's previous findings from a 106 standpoint was an adverse effect, but due to impacts to one archaeological site. It's important to note that they being Federal Highway determined there was a no adverse effect for the Stony TCP. The constraints or issues we identified with the southern bypass, and this has already been mentioned, there is a greater impact to the Stony TCP. And then if we do move in that tie-in point further to the east to Cross Island Parkway, you are now impacting another cultural resource, and that's the Honeyhorn Plantation, which was previously identified as eligible for the National Register. Overall risk associated with this, the greater impacts to Stony TCP are likely to elevate the Section 106 finding from a no adverse effect to an adverse effect. And then you're also likely to have a new adverse effect for the Honeyhorn Plantation, and that will require an amendment to the memorandum of agreement that SCDOT has already prepared and executed with, or that Federal Highway has executed with the State Historic Preservation Officer. From a Section 4F standpoint, so again, these are your parks, publicly owned parks, wildlife refuges, and again, your cultural resources. So a de minimis impact finding was issued, or it's not formally issued yet. They're in the final stages of issuing it after the EA gets signed. But de minimis impact for Stony, TCP, and Old Elementary School Park, that's just Federal Highway acknowledging that while there is a conversion, if you remember from last time we talked about a conversion or a use being transferring a 4F property from non-transportation use to a transportation use. But a de minimis says, yes, there is that conversion, but it's so minimal, it's not really affecting the overall qualities of the resource. So there's de minimis for TCP, Stony, Stony TCP, and then the Old Elementary School Park. Honeyhorn obviously fell out of the study area, so it wasn't considered. With the additional use, so there's more, Lauren said 6 acres of additional right-of-way, so that's more conversion. That's not, again, public versus private does not matter. It's transportation use and non-transportation use. We have more conversion from a non-transportation use to a transportation use. That is going, and this is both for Stony TCP, the Old Elementary School Park, and Honeyhorn. There's going to be new or more conversion. That's going to require individual 4F evaluation. You saw that in SCDOT. They called it a full 4F evaluation. Same thing. Individuals really, if you go look at the law, it's really called an individual 4F evaluation. And this all adds up to additional time and cost needed to complete that individual evaluation. But the important thing here to note, and this is what's represented by this red and the equal sign, is you could spend the money. If SCDOT today said, yes, this makes sense, we'll add it into our project, which I don't believe Federal Highway would find feasible. I think they would kick it out. But even if they did, you would go through the 4F evaluation and may come to a conclusion that there is an alternative that minimizes impacts to the 4F resource. Therefore, you got to go forward with the one that has less impacts. So I think Sean said it towards the beginning of this meeting, that there is an order of evaluation that Federal Highway considers. It's avoidance, minimization, and mitigation. And so there isn't a clear avoidance alternative to these 4F resources. So then you start looking at minimizing. Well, what SCDOT has on the table with some possible tweaks that we're looking at could be viewed as a minimization alternative and still meet the overall purpose and need of the project. So that would be advanced over a southern bypass, just because the southern bypass has more impacts. From an EJ, community impact standpoint, EJ being environmental justice, Of course, we have the Stony community, the EA that has been produced by SCDOT determined there are the project effects are not disproportionately high and adverse compared to non-EJ areas. When you look at possible impacts associated with the southern bypass, you have to give acknowledgement to that there's going to be a need for additional outreach and engagement with the community because of these potential impacts. Modifications to the benefits and burdens analysis that has already been completed. And then also with the new alignment offset from existing US 278, there is noise considerations that need to be considered. As far as the overall risk, new terrain route introduces potential added benefits and burdens to evaluate. That will take time to flesh out. There is the potential for pushback or unacceptance by the community, the affected community. That would be something that had to be assessed through a detailed outreach effort. And then, of course, added mitigation costs associated with the impacts. From an ecological standpoint, the EA identified 22.9 acres of wetlands and streams being impacted and 145 acres of floodplain. And then as far as threatened and endangered species, they determined there was a may affect, not likely to adversely affect for listed threatened and endangered species. The southern bypass does create, there's portions of it that would create segmented forested blocks, which is something that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service would likely be concerned with. There's additionally about 0.7 of an acre of additional NWI wetland impact. Again, keep in mind NWI wetlands are not field verified wetlands. They're just lines on a map that U.S. Fish and Wildlife maintains that says there could be something here. They would still need to be field verified. And then there's additionally 140 linear feet of stream impact and 1 acre of additional floodplain impact. I believe that these additional ecological impacts, especially the segmentation of a forested block, could create concerns from regulatory agencies, and it may actually change the finding from U.S. Fish and Wildlife on the threatened and endangered species front. We wouldn't know that until you actually coordinate with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but based on my past experience, that is something that they would probably look at very heavily, and there may be added mitigation costs because of that. And for those reasons, we don't find that the southern bypass would be a reasonable and prudent alternative that SCDOT would adopt and Federal Highway would accept. It would have too many red flags, too much time and cost added to it, just from the regulatory standpoint and the resource impacts. So I'll turn it back over to, I believe, is it going back to you, Nate?
Yeah, well, yes, we'll just pause here to see if anybody had any questions with the analyses, the overview that we have conducted.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I want to just take a step back because, you know, if you really think about what we're doing is we're dealing with our community and how to make the traffic flow easier with the least impact on the environment and people and so on and so forth. And when you take a step back, you really see that the critical elements in this are these traffic lights, you know, that basically stop the traffic as it comes in and out of Hilton. So I have to give credit to Steve Baer, who's worked quite hard on looking at this this horizontal bypass and circumvents the traffic lights. And so the new and improved version that we have looked at, and you have a copy of you on the table in front of you, really is closer to 278 on the south side. It's partially elevated over Chamberlain and ties into the Cross Island Parkway. So I really like. I know there's some animosity on the table, but I really like everyone to open up to this alternative because it has less environmental impact, less impact on the wetlands, and I think that it deserves a good look. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But we are here, we are all bright people on the table and in the room. At the end of the day, we want to find a solution that works, that has a little impact, as little impact as possible on Stony, which this does, and beyond Stony, and as little impact in disruption, construction, and so on and so forth. So, and I know that there are environmental concerns, especially if we look at the version that's presented here in these drawings, but this version is different, and Nate, I will send you a copy of these things so you can also distribute it to your team, and to really consider it. Ask yourself the question, what is important? It's visual impact, it's traffic flow, it's community, we are all keen to have as little impact on the environment as possible. And with this new and improved version, I think we reached that conclusion. So that is why, Alan, I'm sort of very keen to not just have it considered, but to also have it actually evaluated by Lochman. Thank you.
You just don't get it. To start, you're looking at an EPA study, minimum 5 years, could be close to 10. Federal highway, any new proposal like this starts out at 5 to 7 years. We're going to have to go through that. You got Fish and Game, you could have Coast Guard. Now, the property you're talking about, you have to get down, you say at grade. Well, how far are you going to excavate? You have to get down.
You haven't even looked at the copy on the table.
You have to get down to load-bearing soil.
It's partially elevated. Look at it.
And what do you have? I have. No.
Look at it.
But
I didn't interrupt you.
Yeah, you did. Early on.
How many of these proposals? This is what, number 5? If this doesn't get approval, you're going to come with proposal number 6. You keep throwing, this group keeps throwing these proposals out. You're shouting at the rain. You're not understanding. You just don't get it. And I go back to, you've got all these regulations that we're going to have to meet. Okay? I understand that. I also understand that I've walked some of that property, and I know you're going to have to get down to load bearing and then fill it back up with structural material before you're even going to get a plan approved. Now, those are just facts from highway road building that I've been involved in for over 60 years. So to tell me otherwise, you're not going to sell me because no one has studied the property as far as soil. That's going to be a big problem. And we're talking about traffic today. If we got to wait 5 years before the EPA, Federal Highway, or anyone else says, okay, you can go, where's traffic going to be? We need to look at a solution, whether it's going to be 3 years to do the DOT, or I like the elevated highway if that was 4 years. At that point, we've completed everything. We're moving traffic, hopefully safely through the corridor. We're not just now waiting to get approval. And you have no idea what the expense is going to be. That's fact, because there are wetlands out there. You haven't even thought about, do I need a cutoff or do I need drive piling? And where it's elevated, how are you going to put your piers in? You're throwing all this out, and so you don't have any information.
And can you take a look at it? You haven't looked at this even.
I have. I looked at it. Elevated, how are you gonna put an elevated highway in? Do you know how to build an elevated?
It's not going
Guys.
over wetlands.
Guys, so,
You know, as I appreciate it if you could take a look at it, okay? Thank you.
The matrix that we have shown does speak to one of the previous iterations. Lauren and Chad, while I'll let you weigh in here, but it's our opinion that there's no alignment that could be done that won't have very similar impacts as to what Chad has shared from environmental relocations, things like that. There may be nominal differences, but Lauren, would you agree from an alignment standpoint?
Yes, based on the new bypass alignment that I'm looking at right now, what that does is it swaps one parcel for another as far as a relocation. Previously, with the previous alignment that dipped further south, there was a parcel adjacent to the park that would have been taken. Now that swaps to a parcel along the Parkway that would need to be taken in addition to the property at the corner of Spanish Wells. And another key thing to keep in mind here is I keep hearing that it has less impact than the state option. And as we showed in our evaluation of right-of-way and environmental, that is not true. The problem is this bypass is being compared to the overall project, not the portion of the project that the bypass is replacing. As we showed in our matrix, the current, within the limits of this bypass, the state option is taking 1.2 acres of right-of-way. The bypass option would take at least 6 acres. In addition to the other environmental impacts and needing to extend the bypass further to the east to actually tie directly into the Cross Island, across the Jarvis Creek and tie into the Cross Island. So it's not a true comparison saying this is less impactful than the state option. Because the state option includes all the other work to the west as well.
And Chad, from an environmental standpoint, would you agree that they would be very similar based on, if you've had a chance to take a look at this new alignment, that would be substantially the same impacts?
Yeah, again, I mean, wherever you move that line, it's going to have conversion of the 4F resource, 2 4F resources in this area, well, 3 actually. Stony TCP to Old Elementary School Park, and then when you get to the tie-in at Cross Island Parkway, of course, Honeyhorn Plantation. And again, you can thread the needle however you want it, public, private property, however you want to thread it through there. It's still, remember, an impact to the resource. And from my understanding on past conversations and what's been shared here at this committee is Federal Highway and SCDOT were really on the fence on the de minimis finding they're getting ready to issue for Stony TCP. So that means if they're sitting on the fence, any additional impact is probably going to push it into that need for that individual 4F evaluation, which is what we're trying to avoid. So that's a long way of saying, yes, I would agree.
So if I might real quick, one thing that we don't talk about with this option is you're just pushing the backlog further down the road. So, you know, there are a lot of alternatives that are being introduced, and nobody is saying that down the road they may not be considered. But for the purpose of this study and what we're doing and trying to understand, where are we with what is out there? We know that the scope is from Spanish Wells Light to basically just past Squire Pope for this corridor. So we know that additional things are going to need to be done down the road, and part of the study is to understand how these effects will play on that as it is implemented and what it is that we can do to help mitigate. So I just want to make that statement that we know that beyond this project, there's going to be more that's going to need to be done to create a better flow. So.
But I also think that because we started out with like a spaghetti of alternatives way back, and we've come now to to the four alternatives, the only thing that we are doing is saying, look, the crucial element is getting around the traffic lights and create as little impact on the communities around it. And I think that what we are putting out here covers a lot of those bases. And so we don't have to make a judgment now, but I'd like Nate and his team to take a really serious look, and at the same level as you've done with an elevated bypass, because I wouldn't propose this, I wouldn't come up with it, I wouldn't make a fuss about it if I didn't think it had value. And yes, there are always environmental things, there are building things that may be complicated, but let's take a serious look. That's all I'm asking.
Chad, based on your extensive experience going through and working through the NEPA process, would you agree that in addition to the information that we received from Sean's letter with the DOT, that there would not be a way that the federal review board would approve this moving forward or issue a permit to allow the project to move forward?
I cannot speak directly for Federal Highway Administration, obviously, but based on my experience, it would be a very difficult thing for them to approve.
Nate, if I could ask an odd question, and bear with me as I ask this. What's the purpose of stoplights? Stoplights. What's the purpose? Is it only to move people from one side of the road to the other, or is it to create a flow of traffic that moves at a better pace?
Correct.
So, I understand the point of moving traffic faster, but the faster we move it, we're just creating that bottleneck somewhere else. So if we're able to spread it out, and it does go hand in hand with slowing speed down through that area, through all areas actually. And yes, I'll have a hard time adhering to that, but it'll help alleviate some of those traffic jams. And that's kind of my question, and I'm asking for the expert, opinion on that.
And our model does assume, with the adaptive system, I know Reach, if you brought up the fact that maybe currently that they're not talking to one another, but in our models, we are going to assume that they are functioning, speaking to one another, and we've worked with the Q3 people to work through that. So it's working as best as possible. But as we've mentioned in this, once you reach a certain saturation level, the adaptive system can only do so much. That's why we need to add capacity.
And that's consistent with some previous work that was done. There was modeling that eliminated the signals altogether and created a free flow condition. Surprisingly enough, even at the Windmill Harbor intersection, before a light was put in, there still would be stoppage in traffic due to congestion in the system that would create a break in traffic and people would still turn. And so I just want to make sure. So I think if we're following the evaluation from Lockmuir and other technical documents, lights are part of the system, but they are not in and of themselves the biggest issue in the corridor. I think if you look back at the Lockmuir presentation, which included modeling and hotspots, the merge point as you come on island from US 278 merging from 3 to 2, and then flyover merging from 2 to 1, and then merging at the bridge. That was a very bright red congestion point. It was more so there than at the signalized intersections. And then in the PM peak, it was at the Cross Island, Gumtree, where the merge occurs through that. So it's not just the signals. And having worked on this project for an awful long time, the objective, I've never heard an objective to move people as fast as you can through this segment. It was to provide a balance between transportation, land use, and civility with the impacted areas. And so what we learned with the free flow option, if you eliminated lights, you're going to create a significant issue at the Gumtree intersection on the business route and move traffic much more quickly down to the Palmetto Bay Road corridor and create, exacerbate issues in that area. I'm trying to get Lockmuller so they can do that additional downstream evaluation. What I've heard from SCDOT on this southern bypass is it has a very, very, very small chance, if any, of advancing through the process. We have a real clock right now with the lifespan of the EA documents and the money from the state infrastructure bank is not guaranteed if we don't make a decision at some point here very soon.
You know,
So I want to make
Sean,
sure that that's on the.
I'm going to interrupt you because I think that the whole argument of money is at risk is something that somebody needs to really convince me of. SCDOT will raise funds for their roadworks and their bridges. And I don't want to put the fear into people by saying, oh, we're going to lose the funding, because it's not a critical point, period. And I've been in that financing part of the business, and I know. So let's not go there, please.
So for just the purpose of knowledge, what are the discussions on the Windmill Harbor Light and integrating to our system, since it is not currently integrated?
Previous discussions with Beaufort County and included in the memorandum of understanding executed by the town and the county in October of 2022. Any signal that was not adaptive at the time of a project would be included in the project and integrated into the system. So if a project advanced, that signal would be brought into the adaptive system. The county was involved in the town procurement of our signal system, so that would be seamless once it was executed. Additionally, the Moss Creek signal will be within the project area and incorporated into that system. The county is interested in pursuing integration of the adaptive signal system all the way out to I-95, but beyond the project area, we don't have any guarantee at this point.
But the county is willing to pay for it and have town of Hilton Head manage it. So that's good news, right?
Well, I don't know about the management. It would just be incorporated into the project, and it would be the same technology that the town currently uses for our adaptive traffic signal management.
I just want to bring one more point out on the southern bypass, which is that by doing that bypass, you take traffic out of the regular 278. So suddenly, that gives a lot of room on that track, and it's a significant element. When you can take 50% of the traffic out of the 278 coming onto the island. And the other thing is that you, if you wanted to, you could make it a toll road. You can make toll roads on new roads, apparently, which, you know, if the town chooses to, would be a significant source of income.
All right, so we are on page 48 of 157. We continue? That's what I got right here.
Well, our slides, there are only two more, so don't worry about that. And I will expedite this. This is the same information that you all have seen at the last meeting. The only reason we bring it back to your attention is that, if you recall, one of the primary discussion points at the April 22nd meeting was the delineation between public and private parcels. That was on April 22nd. The town staff, GIS staff was able to provide us with a little bit additional GIS information. And so once on April 24th, so once we received that, we wanted to do our due diligence to see if that impacted the findings at all. And for alternative 3, we just wanted to bring to your attention that, if you recall, on April 22nd, the total acreage was 1.4. Now having this new information, it reduced it slightly down to 1.1. And so then just carrying through with our matrix to show now a tied score. The overall ranking did not change between the alternatives on this. We just wanted to make you aware of it. And then on the final scoring matrix, taking that new score for right-of-way, and then also two, not to go too far into the weeds, the minor change with the right-of-way, the parcels themselves did not change, it's just the quantity of the public and private. So Chad took a look at that with his staff, and these numbers switched slightly. So alternative 2 used to be ranked a 2 previously, now it's a 3, and conversely here for alternative 4, when you do the summation of these, if you recall at the last meeting, the alternative 2 was ranked at I had that noted down there, I'm glad I did that. It was ranked at a 22 and it was tied with alternative 4. Now you can see the differences in scoring, and so now just the way things shook out, new scoring. So we just want to be transparent with the information we provided, and this is the new matrix that's included in our draft summary findings memo that you all were presented on Friday.
We've had this discussion before, but I'm okay with grading per subject. You can compare that. But I am fundamentally opposed adding them up. And of a professional firm, you should be too doubting that. You cannot do that.
This is what we have done in previous projects in different states, and wholeheartedly agree that certain committees and members may weight different things differently. This is just, this was a discussion point to help whittle down and how we chose them. But this is what we've done in the past.
You can be descriptive. So if I look at what's important, safety, right of way, flow of traffic, visual impact, impact on community, I can describe it on each alternative. And then I can draw my conclusions. But I cannot put a number on it and add it up. And we shouldn't do that either. We should be descriptive and be conclusive on the description, rather than putting a number on it.
And the intent with all of this was to be transparent with like what went into each of these scores, but then ultimately it was to provide you all with the information that you needed to make the decision.
No.
Yeah, and I will add, I mean, this is standard way of doing it, but if the committee decides that they don't want us to total them up and provide an overall ranking, you know, that's fine. We can remove those last 2 rows out of the matrix. But I mean, that's ultimately it's the committee's decision if they want to show that or not.
And as Kate had mentioned before, that we've moved these forward because we think they're viable alternatives, and we're trying to delineate some way to differentiate in between them. What we didn't want to come back with you is just saying like you've got 4 good ones and just how it is, or with looking at previous studies where they just have red, yellow, green, and there's no other context. There's no perfect way to do it, but as Lauren said, and as Kate's mentioned, this is the way that we've done them with other corridor studies in other parts of the country.
The agreed upon scope of work asked for the consultant to determine a way to evaluate. It did not say exactly how to do that. It had some elements that were needed to be included in the evaluation, which they are. But again, they're executing against the scope of work. We can question some of the conclusions and findings that they have made or are presented, but the goal of this committee is to make sure that the project is being executed against that scope of work. And when you ask someone to do an independent review and based on engineering provide you information and they've done it according to the scope of work, you can disagree with some of their conclusions, but the methodology is
I understand, Sean,
different.
but it's if you add all up and you get a 24 and a 20, then people are going to say, well, you know, I might go for the 20. And I think that yes, you need to have a measuring stick, but then there needs to be another layer on top of it. I don't know, you know, how to others describe it, but it's wrong to draw conclusions on the numbers. So there's got to be a descriptive.
I think it's also, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there, but I think it's also important to note that this, again, keep in mind, this is a high level valuation. the type of description that I think is being sought here, the detailed description, is something that would have to be fleshed out through the formal NEPA process. So whatever gets adopted by SCDOT and moved into their project, that would be the next layer of screening. This was just, I think Nate and Lauren both said that we've applied this practice across other projects throughout the country. That is true. It's just, we just want to be consistent in how we screen alternatives and how we assign a grade to it. Again, I've seen other consultants use like red, yellow, green. It's, consider it just an initial layer of screening.
That concludes our portion of the presentation.
What about the other 150 pages?
Go over if you want, but I was probably ready to
Yeah.
mutiny.
Sean, do you have anything else to add at this point in time?
We've completed basically the first 3 tasks to move through the independent review of all alternatives, including any additional alternatives that Lockmuir thought worthy to advance. They presented those alternatives. We got feedback from SCDOT at the committee's direction. There is an alternative that is preferred at this point from the SCDOT's feedback. There's some additional design modifications that could be considered to reduce the right-of-way impacts, furthering to reduce the impact of the TCP in the zoning community. Lockmuir needs to be able to evaluate the downstream impacts to complete the next couple of tasks in the scope of work, so we have the final information and final report delivered. I've asked Lockmuir to move forward with alternative 1 with some design modifications to consider based on the feedback that we received from SCDOT on the alternatives. So I've asked them to build that into their model in Vista, so we can understand the downstream impacts.
Are you at a point where you can talk about what those modifications are?
I absolutely.
Please do.
So in the current preferred alternative that the county has recommended as part of the EA document, there is 3.4 acres of total impact to the TCP. 1.12 acres are on private property. So the current design, as you come on island, includes 2 left turn lanes from Hilton Parkway eastbound onto Squire Pope Road. A design modification to reduce those 2 left turn lanes eastbound to 1 left turn lane onto Squire Pope Road is one that SCDOT is evaluating. We've also talked with the county and the county and the town collectively have asked SCDOT to consider that from a performance and right-of-way impact. Also, there are currently 2 right turn lanes proposed as you come southbound on Squire Pope Road and right turn onto Hilton Parkway westbound going off island. There's been a design modification request to SCDOT from the town and the county to reduce those 2 right turn lanes to 1 right turn lane. Again, further reducing the right-of-way impact on the Squire Pope and the Hilton Parkway segment. And then the third modification is there's currently a left, if you're going westbound off island, there's a left turn lane, a dedicated left turn only lane that accesses the Crazy Crab restaurant. There's been a design modification request to move that further westward to reduce the cross section at Crazy Crab and in front of the Stewart properties, to shift that westbound and have that turn lane come back and serve all of the driveway and access points on the southern side. The SCDOT has committed to evaluate those design considerations to see if the right-of-way and the cross-section would be reduced for the roadway need, and therefore reduce the property impacts that the current project that's in the EA proposes. We believe that there will be significant reductions if those design modifications are supported, and understanding the balance again between property impact, the relationship between the transportation corridor and land use, and the performance of the roadway are all considerations. One of the primary goals of federal highways is social justice and environmental and social impact. And so they're significantly interested in alternatives that reduce the impact as much as possible. And that's why the other alternatives that were shared with SEDOT were unlikely to be feasible from their standpoint. But those are the design modifications that we've requested from SEDOT and are included in the alternative one to move the modeling for the next phase of the project forward at this time.
That's all great, but I think it's still premature. You know, we haven't finished with this study, and to push the button, and I mean, some people are so eager to have that alternative one move forward. I'm not 100% sure it actually works. And that is why it's a good thing that we are going to look at this new alternative that we put forward today. So I hope that gets the same attention.
Sean, when you met with SCDOT, how firm are they when they say it's number one? I've had experience with DOTs throughout the country, and you can sit there and get the feeling they say, we're going to do this, that's it. And yet you get the feeling that there's an opening on something else. And did you get that feeling like number 4 or any of the other two? Was there even a hesitation?
I got a completely different feeling on number 4, quite frankly. That they were not interested in alternative 4 at all, advancing. And as I mentioned before, money is a consideration when you are ultimately going to advance this. And if there's a viable solution that minimizes the overall impact and is a I don't say cheaper, is not the right term, but a less expensive alternative, they will consider some additional elements, but the position that has been conveyed to the town and the county consistently is that those additional costs are at the, would have to be borne at the local level. So when we initially started talking about the alternatives, alternative 4, there was a sigh of relief after the discussion on alternative 4. When they said that, well, anyway, they let us know that they were not in favor of an alternative 4 with an elevated bypass. So, but they are willing to understand the local input, right? That there's local input in the project, and that's why they're willing to consider some design modifications beyond what was proposed. They did the same thing when the original preferred alternative was presented. It had the Utah U-turns or Michigan lefts or whatever they're called, that from a performance standpoint they thought were a better solution, but were not supported locally. So they did consider some design modifications.
Okay. Do we have any new business? I don't. Y'all? Okay. Karen, now appearance by citizens, but Karen, do we have any appearances by citizens on items unrelated to those on the agenda?
No, sir.
Okay. For the record, did we receive any portal comments?
He did not.
Okay. Appearance by citizens. Yes, sir.
Christopher Cliff. Just to pick up the point that Ed raised, I think the letter from SCOD is quite explicit. There's only one solution in their view, and it's proposed alternative. They make no comment about the Lockmere proposal of their preferred solution plus. There's no comment at all. So I presume that they're making it quite clear that they're only prepared to consider their option. Sean, a few moments ago, said that there's a time constraint. And one of the things I think Sean said, the lifespan of the EA documents. I'm not sure what that actually means. If you could explain, please, it'd be very appreciated. When Craig Gwynn was in this room, he made it quite clear that the deficiencies in the Mackay Bridge had been provided for to the tune of $40 million. But when you look at the seismic study numbers that have been revealed today, there's no comparison whatsoever. I don't understand where the 40 million that Craig mentioned came from, and the figures in the seismic study, which is dated April 2020. Another thing that came out today, it's not been used before, accident data. Well, Craig Gwynn in this room made it quite plain that on Jenkins Island, it was not an accident hotspot. He emphasized that on several occasions. Furthermore, the 6 fatalities that Sean mentioned, if my memory serves me right, I think all of them involved DUI, very sadly, and one of them, I think, involved 4 fatalities. So to throw in accident data as an important consideration in the SCOD's preferred alternative, I think actually is a slightly misleading. I think we're at a point whereby 6 lanes is being pushed by all the authorities, including yourselves, the mayor, I mean. And all it does is push the congestion further down the road. The SCDT preferred alternative isn't a solution at all, which is quite astonishing, really. Anyway, if Sean could explain what he meant by the EA documentation lifespan, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Other public comments? Fair.
I think you folks have done a great job in rationalizing that the SCDOT plan is the one and only true plan. Congratulations. Your studies seem to be based on a few key principles. Number 1, stay in SCDOT's footprint. Who authorized that? I'd like to know exactly who authorized staying in SCDOT's footprint. Someone must have constrained Lockmiller to do it. Secondly, you ignore proving that you've solved the congestion problem, nor do you have a stress test. We don't even know what your forecast numbers are. Month after month, I've stood up here and said, what are the forecast levels you're using? How many vehicles per hour are in your study? I don't see it. You may be using a truly low number, and that's why your study works. Where is the stress test? If you get more than expected, and I think you will, I think you'll be up to 4,000 vehicles per hour by the end of the study. This plan is simply not going to work. You're going to spend $425 million on an unproven plan. Proving that this plan works with the current levels and with the projected growth levels is a trivial exercise that we have not seen in the hundreds of UGRAPH and dozens of hours that we've been up here. We should see that data. Nextly, the only way this survives is by valuing Gulagichi input and land at essentially 0. It's easy to prove you have the best plan if you just ran through someone else's land. I haven't seen accurate comparisons that value Gulagichi land that you're taking and degrading their neighborhood by cutting off their driveways to the other items that you showed here a little while ago. You've also ducked citizens' questions. We keep asking questions and we don't get answers. It also would have been nice to work interactively and to work the problem together. For example, there are several errors in the slides you've shown. They're going to be propagated. You assume a big impact on Honeyhorn. There's 0 impact on Honeyhorn. All of a sudden, you've invented things that get propagated that make no sense. So this is probably the most unscientific study I've ever seen in my 50 years of engineering life. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Gray Smith, Indigo Run. Lockmuir has said that after we spend close to $500 million, the time saved on the eastbound commute is 1 minute and 40 seconds, and on the westbound commute is 4 minutes. And then they added today and they use percentages to make it look way worse than, or way much more of an improvement than it usually is. They said today, I did the calculations, the eastbound AM in 2045 would be a whole 7 minutes longer if nothing was done. And westbound coming out, if nothing, the no-build scenario, 5 minutes longer. So for this, we're spending $500 million. The other thing is, I was very disappointed. Well, first of all, I thought it was interesting that it was, and very convenient, that the SCDOT response rejects any and all alternatives except their own. Big surprise there. Also, SCDOT erred at the beginning of this project by ending it at Spanish Wells Road, which was ridiculous, rather than including the adjacent major roadways that are integral to the project, namely Gumtree Road and the Cross Island Parkway. And now they're saying, oh, we can't even consider those as part of the project. These critical areas cannot be included in this project without greatly extending the time of construction. Yet improvements in both areas are necessary to reduce peak traffic flow congestion. It was SCDOT's mistake in not going far enough for Hilton Head to begin with. And now we're being asked to ignore an essential area for inclusion in the project to arrive at the best possible solution to our problem because SCDOT screwed up at the beginning. As a 12-year Hilton Head resident, being asked to accept an inferior product at the outrageous cost of about $500 million, I find it totally unacceptable, and I hope you will too.
Thank you. Other comments? Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. I'm Louise Cohen. I'm a native of Hilton Head Island. And of course, I'm a member of the 5th generation of my family. As I sit here today as a native islander, a black person, and just listen, first of all, I want to thank you all for being on the committee. But as you serve on committees, you make decisions for other people. And I feel so good when I hear people making decisions for my community who seem like they have a heart and they understand that we live there and the community which our ancestors established is our inheritance. It's what we have. And for a major highway to just come right on through what you have with no consideration of your life, your livelihood, your home, really. And when that is taken away from you forcibly, you have really no place to go. And our home means as much to us as yours mean to you. And with committee members making decisions for other people, see, you have to think about what you're doing. You are making a decision for someone else. You don't have to live with that decision that you are making. Because after you have made your decisions, you probably go back on the plantation, behind the gates, and that decision you made is not going to affect you. But if you can go home and go to bed and sleep, when you make a decision to come through people's property, I'm talking about destroy their community, destroy their families, their heritage, their culture, and don't care, something is seriously wrong. So I just want to say, on top of what have been said before and what we have been saying many, many times in these meetings, you are hurting people. I'm standing up here, I'm black because God decided to put me in this black body. Okay? I didn't ask for this, He did. And the communities that we grew up in here on Hilton Head Island, and I always relate to the scriptures. Psalms 47, verse 4 said, God choose your inheritance. God did. So we are here in these communities on the land that God chose for us. And it would really, really make me feel good that you put yourself in our places as you make your decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Keller.
And you're going to reap what you sow now. You're going to reap, and that's it. That's the word of God. You're going to get it back. If you don't get it back, your children and your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren.
Other comments, please. Yes, sir.
Richard Busy, Indigo Run. What a surprise to hear that the bureaucrats up in Columbia, the State Department of Transportation, like their plan the best. What a surprise. Well, the bureaucrats in Columbia don't live here. We live here. And I want to congratulate the mayor, the unelected chair of this committee. For the first time, you followed Robert's Rules of Order. You allowed a vote on Mr. Advocate's motion, and it was passed by a vote of 3-2. Now we await an impartial, independent review by the consultants on the horizontal bypass plan. But minutes later, we hear from Mr. Collin that, well, we're going to have to go back to the town council. What a bunch of rubbish. You don't have to go back to the town council. I've read the statement of work, and it's just another obstacle that you're throwing in our face, that we got to have the town council approve this. This is the first time that there's been any discussion of the horizontal bypass plan submitted to this committee. A plan which connects directly to the Cross Island Parkway, a plan which uses almost no private land, is less than half the price of your Plan 4. Consider that more than 50% of the traffic coming onto the island are bound for the Cross Island Parkway. And yet none of the plans, including the state plan on the table now, provide a direct link to the Cross Island Parkway. How crazy is that? And finally, I just cannot understand how an 11-lane aircraft carrier slab, AKA the bridges, is in keeping with preserving the character of Hilton Head Island. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Graves.
Mr. Mayor, members of the committee, consultants, my name is Richard Ritter, R-I-T-T-E-R. I'm a member of the executive committee of the new Hilton Head Bluffton branch of the NAACP, and we are in the process of drafting and submitting to the town a letter expressing the concerns of the NAACP about all of the traffic proposals discussed today. I can't say much about the content of the letter because it has to be approved by the membership at a meeting tonight, and then it has to go to the state conference of the NAACP for review and approval. We expect to have that letter ready to be sent to the mayor within the next 2 weeks. Our concerns are obviously with the impact of the plans on the Stoney community and the Gullah Geechee community as a whole. The Alternative 1 plan says it has no adverse impact on the Stoney community. That is not true, and I think I now understand for the first time why that statement is made. The term adverse impact is drawn from environmental justice law and civil rights law, where the concept is, does a plan have a harsher impact on one group compared to another? It's probably within that context that the term adverse impact is being used, and therefore you can say, well, the impact on the non-Stony community is no greater than the impact on the Stony community. That's the only way I can come up with a rational understanding of the statement in the committee report or the consultant's report that alternative one will have no adverse impact on the Stony community. We know that it will, and it will because there are homes on both sides of 278, as well as some business properties that are going to be impacted. And it's important for us to make clear that our concerns are with the Stony community, and the fact that the Stony community is one of 14 historic designated communities on Hilton Head Island. That puts them in a special place. And our concern is trying to make sure that the interests of this historic neighborhood are being fully accounted for, and that there are no options, no alternatives that can be discussed and put in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ritter. Any other public comments?
Sure, me.
Okay, come on up.
Do my 3 minutes start here? Yes. Okay, hi. I'm Sharon Sherman. I am the president of the NAACP. I just wanted to say, I've been coming to these meetings, seeing familiar faces, trying to learn their names. Yes, I'm new to the island. I've been here since 22. You might know me as Beverly's sister, Bobby. Okay. What I just wanted to say was me coming in and coming to your meetings, and because I was curious as to what was going on. I have seen changes over the years. I admire what has been done, but when it starts to reaching into our community, I'm speaking for myself, my mother, okay, it's hard, okay, because I came here to live, but y'all, excuse me, they keep coming in and chopping away, where it's getting smaller and smaller. All I'm asking is that you, with your decisions, keep in mind that, like Ms. Cohen said, we live here. You know, I'm asleep one morning and I hear sounds in the back. And you always ignore me, but it's okay. And I hear sounds of banging in the backyard. Who wants to wake up to that? And that's because they said, oh, we have a right of way. Then I had to find out what that meant. No, I'm not an engineer, but if you talk to me about anything with dental, I can talk to you. So we as the community want to understand better, not sit here and really listen for 2.5 hours. Something that I felt that you could have kept in private and then come to us with an idea of what you're coming up with. That's all I have to say, and I went under 3 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Sherman. Appreciate that. Mr. Graves.
My name is Trey Graves, born and raised on Hilton Head, live in Bluffton now. I do not envy you. This is not an easy decision to make at all. It is completely complex due to the geography of this area on how to solve the problem. I sit in that traffic every day. I would be willing to bet that roughly 90% of the people in this room will not be sitting in that traffic in 2045. I probably will be. That said, there is an alternative. It is radical, that was proposed decades ago to put another bridge off the island, not in the same footprint of the Graves Bridge, but somewhere at the end of Beach City Road that could connect to St. Helena, that would provide 2 entrances and exits onto the island. It would act as a giant circle. It would keep traffic moving. It would make it so the people that I work with every day don't have to drive from Ridgeland and Hardyville and sit in 4 pinch points before they even get to the bridge, because it would alleviate at least 50%. It would be expensive. You would have to go to private money. It would have to be a toll. It would take a lot of engineering. It would affect the beauty of the island. But it is not a problem or solution that the majority of people that are affected today, that are making these decisions today, will have to deal with when I'm your age. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. Any other comments? All right, seeing none,
We'll come back to the committee and we are adjourned.
oh, Sean, can you talk about the lifespan of the EA? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so as projects go through the NEPA process, when whether it's an EIS or environmental assessment, the information that the findings and conclusions are based on has a 3-year lifespan. So once it gets beyond a 3-year, once that expires, then you have to go through and amend or update the information, or potentially go through the whole process again.
Do you know when the end date is?
I believe it is the end of June 26th, I think. So, yeah, end of June. Yes, sir.
So that's what's pushing some of these decisions then, I guess.
Well, I'm just letting everyone know that there is that is a time constraint.
Well, a lot of us like me had no idea, so thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, so thank you, everybody. Thank you for your comments today, and thank you for being here for this long. We're adjourned.